We're studying the problem of pain, and the scriptures speak often to that process, gives it different words, but similar responses. I want to read a statement by Sidney Harris. He said, I have always preferred to answer this question, why do good things happen to, or bad things happen to good people? I've always preferred to answer this question by turning it inside out and confronted those people with what I call the problem of good. How do they account for the existence of so much good in the world? How is it that man has risen to the heights of love and unselfishness and self-sacrifice? Why should he lay down his life for his friend? Why should he sacrifice his welfare for others? Why has the history of humanity been so illuminated by heroes and martyrs who have willingly died for an idea greater than themselves? We tend to take for granted the virtues of mankind and excoriate its vices. But why should mankind have any virtues at all beyond those of the scorpion and the spider? We have far more cause for rejoicing at God's goodness than for reviling man's imperfections. I like someone who thinks that way. Turn it upside down. The problem of good, where does it come from? Why have we achieved such high levels in areas that he mentions? The self-sacrifice and unselfishness and love. I like that way of thinking. James makes a very straightforward statement. In the book of James, he is talking about inner temptations and outer temptations in that first chapter. Inner and outer. And he says, beginning in verse 2, consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds. And that's the word porkulos, various, many. Many colors is what it's saying. Many kinds of trials, many colors of trials. Because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. I guess when bad things happen to good people, we need to see it as one of the trials from life and come to the realization that we must need some more patience. I guess I need more patience. So God, bring it on. I need more patience. I'll accept that, and I will go through the process, the various kinds of trials, so as to develop this perseverance or patience. But he doesn't stop there. He says perseverance must finish its work if we're to be mature and complete, not lacking anything. So we're still in the growing stage, not yet mature, when we go through trials to develop our patience. And we need to see it that way. We need to react to trials and difficulties in this world with that understanding. I found another verse, Malachi chapter 3. It says something similar. Malachi 3 verses 2 and 3. Who can endure the day of his coming, and who can stand when he appears? For he is like a refiner's fire, and like fuller's soap. He will sit as a refiner and purifier of silver. He will purify the sons of Levi and refine them like gold and silver, and they will present to the Lord offerings in righteousness. If we are to come forth like gold, and that's the metaphor used here, but in other places too. If we're to come forth like gold, there's some refining that has to take place to get out the impurities. If we're going to spend money and buy that elaborate gold covered or gold something, we want it to be the best it can be for the money that we're paying. And it needs to be refined. I don't look at any of you and think that you still need to be refined. I don't think that way. And yet Scripture tells us that that's true. You look at me, it's true. We still have some refining that has to take place. And that perseverance becomes mature and complete when we go through those trials of many kinds, the Porkalos trials. So, at least as we go back to our topic and segue to some other things, these hopefully can be of benefit to us. One of the things that occurs with God allowing life to work in our life is described in Romans 8, verses 28 and 29. We studied verse 28 last week. For we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. For those he foreknew, he predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, so that he might be the firstborn among many brothers. I didn't take the time, and it's in next week's bulletin article, to talk about foreknowing and predestined, those words chosen, the words that are used in verses 29 and 30. But God is working in our life to help us to look more like his Son. And I don't know how to explain it beyond that. To be more like his Son, to be in his likeness. And what kind of life did he go through? What kind of suffering did he go through? And we're told that he identifies with us because of that. He walked on this planet, and he went through things that we're going through. But turning it around, we are being molded, transformed. We are being moved by God to be more like Jesus. And I would hope, at least we could say it intellectually, and hopefully it will get down into our emotions to where we feel this way. But I hope we can come to feel as if that's a good thing and worth the process. Whatever it takes for me to be more like Jesus, I'm all for it. Are you? And when we reach that conclusion, it helps us to respond rather than to react to the trials of life. It's a response. It's a intellectual and emotional response rather than a reaction of surprise, of regret. We're being molded, we're being transformed to be more like Jesus. I'm looking at reasons that trials come into our life. One of the reasons, or one of the other reasons, is a result of people's choices. King David made a choice. He should have been out with his army. It was a time of rest, if you will, and so he stayed behind. And he did something that he does often. He went out on the top of his place of abode, And he looked and he saw and he lusted and he desired and he commanded someone under his authority to bring that woman to me. So the consequences of Bathsheba's life, her husband's life, and to a child to be born are a result of someone's choices. His choice led these things to come into their life. I have been part of a true debate. I'm not sure that some agree with this, but I believe it to be true. David had the right to command with his authority and demand that Bathsheba be brought to him. And I have made the comment because of his position, she was not really in a choice situation. It's not as if she had the ability to choose. It was something forced upon her. And the consequences certainly are immense as it related to other circumstances as a result of David's choice. But it happened because of someone's choice. What about someone drinking or texting while driving? And you know, wasn't that many years ago that I would never have known what that meant. It would never have been in our vocabulary, would it? Choosing to drink and drive has been in our purview for decades. Choosing to text and drive is fairly new. But whose fault is it when someone makes those choices, have an accident, and someone is killed? Is that God's fault? Is it God's fault, and can he be blamed as a result of that choice that led to the life lost of someone? It's nature. It's allowing common natural law to reign, allowing people to make choice, and there's consequences to people's choices. And so again, those type discussions can be enlightening for that agnostic or atheist that's using that as an excuse to not believe in God. At least it forces them to think slightly differently. And if you can convince them to think slightly differently a little bit, there's hope that they'll think a little bit more and come to realize the power and the love and the majesty of God and the natural law that he puts into place. Your reflections as we've segued from one class to another. Tommy?
I think in some ways God trains us to deal with grief, and I'll give you an example of that. When we were young, our grandparents passed away, right? And that sort of got us on the track that, this is going to end. Eventually, your parents will pass away. And each one of these events is more and more grief. It's much more grievous to lose a parent, my mom, than it was my grandma. And eventually we may reach a point where we lose our spouse, which is 10 times worse probably than losing your mother or dad. And so God is merciful in the fact that he doesn't have us losing our spouses in our teen years. He allows us a chance to mature, experience grief over the course of years, learn from it, understand it a little bit before it just plain hits us in the face.
Yeah.
It's gradual training, and it's the design of life. I think that's the way he designed it, to be a training ground.
And Ecclesiastes 3 makes a list of those things, and it's the seasons of life. There's a time to be born, and there's a time to die. And we come to those realities, and there's other lists there that would help us to come to those realities as well. I want to read you from 2 Chronicle, There's a statement made, but I can read it from 2 Chronicles chapter 33. A similar statement in 2 Kings verse 21. 2 Chronicles 33 verse 10. And the Lord spoke to Manasseh and his people, but they would not listen. Hear that for a second. They would not listen. Therefore the Lord brought upon them the captains of the army of the king of Assyria, who took Manasseh with hooks, bound him with bronze fetters, and carried him off to Babylon. Now when he was in affliction, he implored the Lord his God, and humbled himself greatly before the God of his fathers, and prayed to him. And he received his entreaty, heard his supplication, brought him back to Jerusalem and to his kingdom. Then Manasseh knew that the Lord was God. Now that's a tough lesson, isn't it? Sometimes God lets bad things happen to us, other people's choices. He doesn't supersede with their choices. And it knocks us to our knees, and it forces us to know that he is God. These are the words of 2 Chronicles 33. He prayed to God because he was there before he did not know God. He would not listen, and he was brought to his senses. God heard him, brought him home, and he knew the Lord was God. Now, do you need that to happen to you? To know that God is God? Do you need something tragic to happen for God to have your attention? I would hope not. And for those sitting in an audience on a Sunday morning in our church buildings, I would assume not. We have examples of that type thing happening, and it's clearly described for us in that verse. 2 Chronicles 33 verse 16, he also repaired the altar of the Lord, sacrificed peace offerings and thank offerings on it, and commanded Judah to serve the Lord God of Israel. So not only did it bring him back, but he offered the proper sacrifices and then led his people back. But it would not have happened. Remember the therefore. See what it's there for. Because he would not listen to God, therefore the Lord brought upon him what we read. God did that for a reason. And it brought a number of people back to him. We are slow learners. Sometimes in congregations we're slow learners. We'll see and hear things for a long time, and we just never take it in. We just never appropriate it to our life until, boom, suddenly something will happen, and we'll, as they say, sometimes the light will go off. We will get it, finally. I guess Scripture is telling us, don't be a slow learner. Don't be a slow learner. Listen to God, do what he tells you, and some of the things we'll say today and next Sunday, or 2 weeks from today, as we finish Romans 8, we'll speak to some of these issues. Stan?
Yeah, we are each a diamond in the rough.
Yep.
And the illustration of a chisel and a hammer. Sometimes if a gentle chisel and hammer doesn't work, it's got to bring in a bigger one. Okay? And sometimes that's how God works in our life.
Yeah. The Romans, Paul wrote the church at Rome and talked about the potter. Doesn't the potter have the right to make from the clay whatever it wants? Whatever he wants the clay to become? And he used that concept to debate, if you will, the church there, to correct their thinking so that they would see God in the light that would be appropriate. God is the potter. We're the clay. We're the diamond in the rough. And it's true. Turn to 1 Peter 1, 6 and 7. Let me have permission to come back to this verse in a few weeks. As we finish Romans 8, we're going to begin a study of 1 Peter, of handling life's difficulties. Use that mantra to go through the book. But we'll need to, this is a main verse, set of verses, as we would begin that study. 1 Peter 1, 6. In this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little time, if need be, you have been grieved by various trials. There's that porculos again, the many-colored trials. That the genuineness of your faith, being much more precious than gold, that perishes though it is tested by fire, may be found to praise, honor, and glory at the revelation of Jesus Christ. This purification that needs to take place in our life. We grieve, the New King James says, we grieve these many trials, and yet they reveal the genuineness of our faith. We related last week the test and the trust that was involved in God suggesting that Job be tested. He trusted him. God trusted Job, and the test he proved correct. Philippians 1:7. In this class, after we finish the problem of pain, we're going to spend at least 4 weeks looking at the 4 things in the book of Philippians that steal our joy. The joy stealers from the book of Philippians. Philippians 1:7, just as it is right for me to think this of you, because I have you in my heart, inasmuch as both in my chains and in the defense and confirmation of the gospel, you are all partakers of me of grace. Paul is letting them know that I'm in prison, but I'm okay. And what I'm doing is connecting to you and wanting you to be partners with me in this. Be partners with me. Be partakers with me of the grace of God. And to be able to say it while you're in prison for no reason, no just reason, is part of the messages of that book. 2 Corinthians 4:17. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, is working for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. Sometimes the things we're going through don't seem light, but comparatively, as we saw in Romans 8, the things we go through are nothing compared to the glory that's going to be revealed. This is the same idea. The hardships in life are nothing compared to the glory that's waiting for us. There's no comparison. And Paul calls them light afflictions. We don't like that, probably sometimes. It may be light for you, but not for me. It's difficult for me. And we'll acknowledge that. I'm getting ready to sneeze. Excuse me. We go through different trials. Some of them are heavier than others, and heavier for me than for others. But again, what's the result? What's the result? And that's the thing that comes to mind. We studied the book of Revelation. We probably didn't slow down enough at the last 2 chapters to take them in the way we could. But Revelation 21 verse 4, God will wipe away every tear from your eyes. There shall be no death or sorrow or crying. There shall be no more pain, for the former things have passed away. Now that's what we're comparing whatever is happening in this world to. That's the comparison. And I can't wait to get there. Maranatha, Lord, come quickly. We declare his death until he comes again every Lord's Day around communion. I can't wait for those things to occur. But if I don't respond properly here, that's not where I will be. I will not be where there's no pain or sorrow or tears. And so what I do here matters. How I respond here matters. How faithful I am in the midst of hardships rather than denying God and leaving him matters. And that's not something that you don't know. If you've ever read C.S. Lewis's Screwtape Letters, he is training his nephew Wormwood on how to tempt a Christian. And there's several advice chapters, if you will, that are part of that book. And one of the things C.S. Lewis describes Satan, and that's who it is. Satan is helping his nephew let them think that everything's okay. Let this Christian think that everything is okay. In fact, make it as okay as you possibly can. Now, I'm paraphrasing 7 pages. Make it to appear okay in every way you can. If you don't, he might, and then he tells us some of the things from Scripture that might happen. He might see it as a need to develop patience, and patience needing to be mature and complete. So Wormwood is encouraged by his tempting process to make it seem okay, rather than to notice what's happening in these circumstances. Here's another statement that C.S. Lewis makes, and I believe it to be absolutely correct, and Malachi proved it to us. We can ignore even pleasure, but pain insists upon being attended to. God whispers to us in our pleasures, but he shouts, I missed a phrase. God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pain. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. Do you think that's true? When everything's going just fine, Deuteronomy 8, you're going to go in and eat from fields you didn't plant, drink from wells you didn't dig. You're going to have everything you need, paraphrasing, and you had nothing to do with it. Be careful lest you forget God. They're encouraged. Be careful in the good times lest you forget God. He whispers in our pleasure, speaks in our conscience, but pain is that megaphone. It demands our attention. And sometimes that's what God needs to get our attention, to have us turn to him. If you don't turn to God in your worst of circumstances, what's the alternative? Let's just be sure we see that. What's the alternative? You reject God, turn away from God. Who are you turning to?
Satan.
And why would you do that? Who's the source of those things? His native language is lying. He cannot tell the truth. And it's because of sin coming into the world that the creation and each person groans for deliverance. We saw in Romans 8. What's the alternative? And at some point when we're talking to those who are disappointed and hurt and their faith has been shattered and suddenly they're considering leaving God, we somehow need to appeal to them with exactly the argument or the statement that we just made. There are two paths in this world. Romans 8, the path that follows after the flesh and the path that follows after the Spirit. Matthew 6, the wide path and the narrow path. One leads to eternal damnation, the other leads to eternal life. Where are you going if you turn your back on God? What sense does that make? But that's the difficulty, because sometimes their emotions don't allow them to see the common sense of their decisions. And that's the problem. Seeing terrible things happen at war, that's the two things I'm aware of with individuals. To see a close friend your age die of cancer and leave behind 2 children is hard to reckon with. It's just hard to understand. And yet what's the alternative? Where are you going to follow to where your eternal security is there? Terry?
I think the devil would say, well, if you don't follow God, then you're neutral. Well, he may not say that. We may think we'll just be neutral. But like the song, what will you do with Jesus, my brother? And it says, what will you do with Jesus, my friend? Neutral you cannot do. Because when you're not for God, then you're for the devil.
Yeah, you see, you're for me or against me, he said.
Work for him.
Yeah. You can't be neutral. Neutral is against God.
There's the lyrics from a song that went, if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice.
Yes.
And that's exactly true of God. If
Yeah.
you've not decided to be with him, you have made a choice already.
Yeah. And you're giving in to Satan's tempting techniques to wormwood.
Yeah.
Make them think that it's okay because you haven't made a choice yet. I haven't decided yet. Oh, yes, you have.
Yeah.
Rick?
And then there's the atheists, right? And they act like that's not a religion. But they got no evidence to prove their
Oh,
religion.
yeah.
None whatsoever. In fact, they're claiming the universe came out of nothing, which violates all laws of physics, and existed in the size of this room at one point.
Yeah.
And they're saying they're not religious.
Yeah, it's an amazing process that people go through. I'm dealing, probably in my comments and my experience, is the person who once held a belief, but life circumstances hit them in a way that caused them to lose that belief. I'm approaching it more that way because that's what I've seen more often. Certainly there's a lot of people out there that don't believe in God. There's no question about that. Let me read from 2 Corinthians 4, and it gives us some of the reasoning, and it tells us how to respond. I like the twofold approach. We do not lose heart Though outwardly we're wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. Since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. So the unseen and seen are put before us. And the troubles, not denying them, but they're accomplishing something for us. They're accomplishing something for us. And I think that's important. I read something this morning that are in my notes. I want to look for a second and see if I can find it. I've spent a lot of time trying to find the many responses to these questions. And I don't want to be repetitious. One person wrote about going to a nursing home. I'm not going to find it, so I'm going to have to just refer to it. But he went to a nursing home, and he found out later that if a new nurse came to work there, they sent them to see Mabel. In other words, go to room so-and-so and meet and be helpful to Mabel. And he wrote about hearing that after the fact and understanding it, because he went in and Mabel was blind. One side of her face was eaten with cancer, and there were open sores associated with it. And he wrote about how he befriended her and spent time with her. And early in the process, he took her some flowers. And because she was blind, he had to tell her that I brought some flowers. And she said to him, take them to someone else because I can't see them. Take them somewhere else for others to enjoy them. And he did. And he said, who should I tell them sends them? And later, as he was writing, he said, I'm not really sure where that came from. But who do I tell the person that I'm bringing flowers to? Where do they come from? And she says, tell them that my Jesus sent them. And with time, as he befriended her, he asked her, what do you do when you're here mostly alone? What do you do? She says, I talk to my Jesus. I talk to Jesus. I don't know about you, but the hair on the back of my neck is rising for someone who has that kind of outlook and the lessons that can be taught by people like that. Wanting to achieve that unseen glory. And Romans 8 tells us that while we're here, we're bringing him glory. What we say and do brings God glory, as we will one day be brought to glory in eternal time. It's good stuff. I'm looking, and I just found the comments. Wouldn't you know it as soon as I looked over? John Ortberg, Life You've Always Wanted, is where he tells that story. Your observations, we don't have time maybe to go another direction. And
The scripture in 2 Corinthians about our light and momentary troubles. And sometimes they do seem so weighty and seem more than momentary.
gives us what we need when He brings us to certain circumstances in our life. He has never not provided what we need. If we don't sense the things provided, if we don't see the things provided, if we don't think they're there, what have we done? We've closed our mind and heart to God, because He will provide. He will, He will let us see it. He will bring us through those things. I'm not a fatalist. I'm not a pessimist. I'm a realist, an optimistic realist. And because of that, I have to say this, and it's time for us to close. Even if what we are asked to deal with does not change or end, even at the point of our death, what's next if we've responded properly? Eternal glory, the presence of God. That which is unseen, which lasts forever. And the word forever doesn't even fit when you speak to eternity. It doesn't even begin to answer that word. So even if some of these things, well, let's go to the Hebrew. The forefathers longed for that city, but they died and they did not receive that city. But they did receive by faith those things promised by God. Whatever the circumstances, we are one breath away from the presence of God for eternity. Now, the second judgment doesn't occur when we pass. There's a time waiting for that second coming. But we are in the presence of God. As we're in Hades, in Abraham's bosom, in that place that's very different than where the rich man went, for comparison. So we will be up early Tuesday, flying to Florida, about 9 hours on a plane with a short break in Denver. Pray for our safe travel. And someone said, will you just be gone on one Sunday? I says, I made the determination over 43 years ago that if I'm ever away for 2 Sundays in a row, they'll realize they don't need me and let me go. So I never plan to be gone 2 Sundays in a row. It's not going to happen if I have anything to do with it.